Hello and a very warm welcome to this week's edition of the WION-VOA co-production. I'm your host Molly Gampir, and we are starting off this edition with a visit by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to the White House, a crucial one. In fact, US President Donald Trump and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be at the White House to sign an agreement granting the US access to Ukraine's lucrative rare earth minerals. But Ukraine's leader says a few outstanding issues remain. And White House correspondent Anita Powell reports from Washington. Take a look.
A deal is in the air, says President Donald Trump, with Ukraine's president coming to the White House to sign a mineral agreement on Friday. The still developing deal would give the U.S. substantial rights to Kyiv's lucrative rare earth minerals and compensate Washington for weapons sent to Ukraine to fight Russia's 3-year war of aggression.
We're going to be signing an agreement, which will be a very big agreement, and that'll be on rare earth and other things.
But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky flagged a key pillar that is not in the current deal: concrete guarantees for Ukraine's security. Earlier Wednesday, Trump effectively dismissed a key Ukrainian wish: membership in NATO.
In this deal, there are only, basic things about that. Yes, security guarantees and etc. But I think it's not about it. Next steps have to be about it. Without future security guarantees, we will not have really just peace, and we will not have really ceasefire, what Trump spoken about. And if we don't have it, nothing will work. So we will have nothing.
Elena Prokopenko of the German Marshall Fund says the minerals deal was part of Zelensky's original peace formulation.
It is difficult for the Ukrainian government to completely go back on the offer. Unfortunately, the draft deal that was offered to Ukraine in response to this proposal was quite disappointing and quite one-sided. But now that the arrangement seems to be much more balanced, the Ukrainian government is ready to sign it.
Prokopenko, a former advisor to Ukraine's finance minister, says she expects some finessing before the deal is signed.
There's some progress in terms of mentioning guarantees as a factor, but it will have to be much more detailed in the final deal, because at the moment there's no specific connection basically in between security and investments. As of now, it looks like an investment deal, but not as a security deal.
And there are other details still to be finalized before this brutal war can end. Russia now controls about a fifth of Ukraine's internationally recognized territory and has vowed to not give any of it back in a would-be peace settlement. Anita Powell, VOA News, Washington.
And joining us on the broadcast this minute with additional inputs is VOA's Jessica Stone. Hi, Jessica. UK Prime Minister was at the White House, in fact, yesterday on the heels of the French President Emmanuel Macron's visit as well. What's Europe's position on this proposed peace deal, really?
Well, Europe's position is basically we need to keep Putin from coming back for more. If we reach this agreement that would give the U.S. much more economic vested interest in Ukraine and create a partnership, which is how it's been described, an economic partnership to develop these mineral resources. What Europe wants is that they want to be able to put boots on the ground as a peacekeeping force, but have the assurance that the Americans will come and aid them with air support, with logistics and the like, in the event that Russia wants to take more territory. And what they hope that will accomplish is giving Putin a reason not to take more territory. Molly?
Right, Jessica, a peace deal will basically remain elusive without the cooperation of Moscow. So what do we know about movement on that front?
Well, we've seen just the beginnings of a reconstitution of diplomatic relations between Moscow and Washington. Earlier this week, we saw diplomats meeting in Istanbul to reconstitute and re-energize the respective embassies in Moscow and Washington. Trump has said that Moscow will need to make concessions to make this peace deal work. He says he wants to get as much territory back as possible and that talking to both sides is the fundamental goal here, and that only by doing that, he says, can he bring about this peace that he's looking for, and certainly the ceasefire that he's seeking.
Right, Jessica, do stay on with us. We are coming back to you in just a bit. Let's also now dive in to study the impact of the federal funding freezes on some of the Trump administration's most loyal supporters. Now, the ongoing freezes in federal funding are impacting the U.S. agricultural industry. And VOA's Kane Parapo has more from the Midwestern state of Wisconsin. Take a look.
Farmer Andy Hatch grows and produces what the state of Wisconsin is famous for.
Cows and cheese. It's really what, built our state and still is a hugely important part of our economy. $46 billion impact on our state.
A key source of Hatch's income is a specialty cheese that ages on racks in his facility.
It will age for about a year before we sell it. It's in here biding its time, becoming delicious.
To compete with European cheese producers that are heavily subsidized by their governments, Hatch needs to upgrade and expand.
To be competitive, we need support from public institutions, from the government.
Hatch turned to the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS, for funding.
We applied for and were awarded federal funding through the NRCS. And that funding was meant to cover about 25% of a project that will stretch over $1 million.
Hatch had already spent about $50,000 on designs for modern, environmentally friendly facilities for housing and feeding cows that produce milk for cheese, when he received notice in January that funding for USDA conservation projects was frozen.
We've not started construction, and we won't until we're sure that the funding we were promised is going to come through.
We're not getting paid or reimbursed for work that we have done.
Joe Tamandel is executive director of the Dairy Grazing Alliance, which also depends on USDA funding for a variety of projects, including apprenticeship programs intended to train a new generation of dairy farmers and agricultural workers.
We understand, the objectives of the administration and coming in and making sure that there isn't any abuse of the systems. And we just hope that we're not an unintended consequence of it, because, we really align with what this administration is looking at doing.
Uncertainty is the biggest risk for all actors in the agricultural supply chain.
Andrew Stevens is an assistant professor of agriculture and applied econometrics at the University of Wisconsin. He says even if funds begin to flow again, farmers will be wary about future reimbursements.
The uncertainty of these federal freezes is really going to shift how farmers are making decisions and calls into question things that used to be taken for granted.
In her first comments to reporters after being confirmed as the Trump administration's U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins said one of her top priorities was addressing federal funding freezes.
If there are farmers that are indeed waiting for payments that have been committed to them, those will come through.
We will pause. We will wait.
Farmer Andy Hatch hopes the federal funding he was promised arrives soon.
But if it doesn't, we won't be able to build.
Despite the funding delays, the USDA projects overall net U.S. farm income in 2025 will increase about 30% over 2024. Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Dodgeville, Wisconsin.
And Jessica Stone is still with us. Going back to her. Jessica, at the same time, the Congress is also trying to approve a spending package to fund the government. And there is a broad disagreement, basically, among the lawmakers about how to pay for President Trump's priorities while still reducing the debt. So what's the latest on that?
Well, it's certainly setting up to be a conflict not only between Republicans and Democrats, but between Republicans that are moderate and Republicans that are not moderate, that are very conservative on spending, because these tax cuts will cost money, and it's not clear that they will be offset fully by all of the cuts that are being made in the federal government with the freezing of USAID funding, which, for example, is about $58 billion US, 1,600 employees there let go. This big, beautiful bill, as the president president likes to call it, was passed by the House this week. It has to go to the Senate for approval, and it's unlikely to get it there because Senate Republicans are concerned about the offsets and the cuts that have to be made to Medicaid, which is a health care program for the poor. They're also concerned that maybe this won't even get them to where they need to go to offset the $36 trillion in national debt. But changes are going to take longer than just a couple of days, and we do have a March 14th deadline in which the federal government will cease to be funded, essentially shut down, which is something we come to you often talking about if this bill is not passed. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be closely watching the shuttle diplomacy between not two countries, but two ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, the White House and Capitol Hill.
Also, Jessica, this week the Supreme Court issued a decision in the White House effort to cut funds to the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. So tell us what explains this and what does it really mean for global agencies which rely on USAID?
So global agencies around the world that have been relying on USAID are basically writing it off, saying they're going to have to close their programs because this has been now a matter for the courts to decide. What the Supreme Court justice did this week is he said, I am not going to enforce a lower court decision to reinstate these payments to contractors for USAID. So they're not being restated. What he did ask for is for the plaintiffs in the case. A lot of these contractors has brought this case. He asked them to basically prove why they need the funds, what is so valuable about their programs. There was no other rationale for this order, and they have to get that information into him by noon today, so just about 4 hours away. The heart of the case really is going to be, can the executive branch, where I am, the White House, cancel spending that's already been approved and appropriated by those on Capitol Hill? In the U.S. system, Congress has the power of the purse, and that is very much being challenged by this White House.
All right, Jessica Stone, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thanks very much for joining us here with those inputs. And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of the WION-VOA co-production.